Hi, this is Bobby Bear. You're listening to Frankly Speaking.
Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, and this is 10 years in the making. I'm so honored to have on the program this morning Duane Eddy. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, I'm honored to be on the show. I understand it's your 10th anniversary?
It is, and the first show I ever did, I was trying to come up with things to talk about. I'd never done radio before, and I said, there should be a sign coming into Corning that says hometown of Duane Eddy, and I'm sorry to say I've let you down. After 10 years, there's not a sign.
Oh. That's all right. That would be nice. It's a beautiful little city.
It is, but I will say this. After we got this all scheduled, I talked to the mayor, Mayor Negri, and there's a big, long proclamation. I won't read it to you all, but I'll send it to you. But it does say, now therefore be it resolved that on behalf of the city of Corning, its residents, and the Corning City Council, we congratulate you on your successful career and proudly recognize you as a former resident of our great city. And as a memento on this occasion, I do hereby proclaim Wednesday, June 7th, 2017, as Duane Eddy Day in the city of Corning. So it's Duane Eddy Day here.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, tell Mayor Negri that I really appreciate it.
I will.
And thank him for me, if you will.
I absolutely will. So we're all celebrating.
What does that mean, Duane Eddy Day? Does that mean I get free Diet Cokes at the Dairy Queen?
It does, but you got to get down here today.
Oh, okay. I'll just wish myself there. That's serious honor, and I'm being flippant and trying to be funny about it because I'm a little shy or a little what am I trying to say? I don't know what to say.
Well, good. Well, that's what we were hoping for.
I'm honored, and I thank you and thank the mayor, and I never had a Duane Eddy Day before.
Wow.
So.
Well, there it is, June 7th, 2017. We've been very excited. It was on the front page of the paper today. Very excited about this interview. What do you remember from your time in Corning? You weren't here an awfully long time, right?
I was born there, and I lived the first 5 years of my life, and then we moved up to Bath.
Oh, okay. So it's still right down the road, of course.
Yeah, well, just up the road. And I had aunts and horse heads, and then my mother was born in Waverly, and then my father was born down in Pennsylvania, Towanda, which is 20 miles south of the border. And I had an aunt who was one of the first telephone operators in the country in Elmira.
Wow. So yeah, you definitely have a lot of connections here to the area.
I do. And then we moved after Bath. I started my first year kindergarten in Bath, and then lived there for 5 years and moved up to Guyanoga, which is 2 miles north of Bridgeport at the western fork of the Cayuga Lake.
Oh, sure.
And went to school in Penn Yan for a couple of years, and then we moved to Arizona. But I love that country. I mean, the Finger Lakes country is just so beautiful, and we've driven through there a few times when we've been back east, and I didn't know anybody, so nobody to stop and visit. But I do remember we lived down off on 2nd Street in a duplex, and I remember there was a park across the road. Well, you go out to the end of the road and then down to the main road, and then across that main road there used to be a park with a lake, and even though I was only between 1 and 5, I mean, I suppose it was the years between 3 and 5 that I remember mostly, but I remember I got those little double-bladed ice skates and skated on the lake, and rode my sled around down the hill there, and used to walk with my father every Sunday to get the newspaper. There used to be a little store on the corner and across the road, the main road. And one Sunday I decided, I think it was about 4 or 5, I decided I wanted to go do it on my own. And my folks, being the way they were. They thought that was cute, and they wanted to teach me to be independent anyway, so they let me go. They gave me the quarter and told me, he says, now you know what to do. I says, yep. So I went in and gave the guy the quarter and picked up the paper, which was heavy. Sunday papers are always heavy. But this, and while I was waiting across the street, waiting for the light to change, this man came up and started talking. Where are you going, little boy? I said, I'm going to get the newspaper. And he says, okay. And, well, be careful crossing the street. I says, oh, I will. I didn't know it was my father disguised. And he'd been following me the whole way. But I thought I did it all on my own. So things like that build confidence and independence. Yeah. And that's the way they were all my life. And I had a great childhood up there.
Oh, that's great. Now, were you big into the rural lifestyle, like the hunting and fishing and all the great things we have to offer in this area?
Oh, yeah. And I learned to swim in Keuka Lake and had swimming lessons. And, they had camp down there, and you'd learn to make a lanyard. They call them boondoggles, I think. But did all that, and I learned how to swim all the different strokes, and it's a good thing to know.
Oh, sure.
And it was beautiful. I mean, the water was cold. They're spring-fed lakes, but after you're in it for a minute and you're a kid, you don't care.
No.
You know, I just used to float around out there and just look at those beautiful hills and the vineyards and the apple orchards and the blue sky, puffy clouds, and just it was just memories imprinted upon my brain all these years later. And my dad worked for Quebeco Bread. He drove a bread truck.
Oh, okay.
For several years, and had a route all around the area, about 100 miles or so. And I went with him a few times, and that was I remember that experience as well, going to the bakery and getting the truck.
Oh, sure.
And the smells of that fresh baked bread and mixed with the gasoline of the truck, it's just, I can still smell it today.
I believe it.
Then when we moved to Bath, he went with NBC bread, whatever it was. But I got a picture of him in his truck. So
that's great. Duane Eddy is our guest this morning. Of course, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member and Corning native. So around what time in the process did you take up the guitar?
Just as we moved to Bath.
Okay.
When we moved up there, we were down in the cellar. My dad was checking out the heater. In those days, they had a chute. The coal truck would come up and fill up the bin with coal, and then he'd shovel it into the furnace, and that was our heat for the house. And so he was down there checking that, and I was with him, and I looked over, leaning against the wall, it hadn't been put away, was a guitar. And I said, what is that? He said, it's a guitar. And I said, how does it work? And so he showed me a couple, 3 chords, and he says, I used it to court your mother. And so I learned a few chords. Then I went to the theater there and saw Gene Autry and Roy Rogers movies, and I loved the music in them. And so I just do my level best to learn more chords. And I didn't know you could play up the neck till I was about 9. So that was a big revelation. And I just used to sing Happy Birthday to my friends and everything.
Sure.
And sing Hank Williams songs. And I just grew up with it in my hands, more or less. Started working when I was 15.
Well, how did you know that you were going to go into guitar? I mean, you say you're working at 15. How did you know when that was going to be your profession?
I didn't right then. I just my dad had switched over when we moved to Tucson. He went to work for Safeway stores, which is a huge chain out there. I think they have them back east as well. I'm not sure. He was assistant manager in Tucson, and then they gave him his own store in a little town called Coolidge, which is out in the middle of the desert, halfway between Tucson and Phoenix. but they had a little radio station, and the DJ came in, and my dad said, "My son plays guitar like dads will do."
Right.
You know? And so the DJ, his name was Jim Doyle, he came out to, he worked at the station. He said, "Bring him out and we'll tape something. We'll put something on tape, and if it works out okay, I'll play it on my morning show." So we did, and he did, and kids rushed up to me at school the first day and said, "You want to come to my house and play music?" And that was, his name was Jimmy Delbridge, and he later changed to Jimmy Dell. And he played piano, I played guitar, and we sang country songs together, harmony, and like the Everly Brothers. But we hadn't heard of them, and when we did hear them, we quit. No, it was... we actually quit before that, but we did that for a while, and went to Phoenix and got on the local talent show, and I met the guys up there, and then I was getting out of school. I was turning 18. I moved up there and started working in that, and then I got the job in the band and played on TV and ballrooms on Saturday night, and I was in the backup band, and then Lee Hazelwood, my first producer. In the meantime, back a couple of years before that, we're still in Coolidge. Jim Doyle left town and went to a bigger market, and Lee was just coming out of radio school, Columbia Broadcasting School, and they try to place their graduates. So they heard about this opening, and here he came. They sent him to Coolidge, and so he heard Jimmy and I and singing. He made a little record. He wrote these songs that weren't too great, and made this record that wasn't too great, but we had fun doing it. And nothing happened with it, but he went on and then he changed markets, moved to Phoenix, and actually about the same time I did, and then he produced a record on Sanford Clark called The Fool in 1956 that was a top 10 record on Dot Records. And then he worked for Dot for a while. He moved to Hollywood, and then he came back and started recording in 1957, Everybody, and Raunchy became a hit in 57, instrumental. And so he said, well, maybe we should try an instrumental, and I was the only one he hadn't signed who didn't sing. I quit singing, and pretty much, and just played. And so he says, go home and write something. So I went home, wrote a song, and he cut it and put it out, and I sent it to a label in Philadelphia. They put it out, and it got up to number 70 in Billboard. And so they said, go back in, do some more. And I went back in March of 58 and recorded Rebel Rouser, and the rest is history, as they say.
Right. Duane Eddy is our guest this morning on Frankly Speaking. So what is it like when Rebel Rouser comes out? And it's just, well, the whole album, a huge hit, 6 hit singles, stayed on the charts 82 weeks. What's that time in your life like?
Hectic, in a word, because I was immediately sent out first for promotion and to do, Dick Clark TV shows and Alan Freed shows, and those were the big DJs back then in New York and Philadelphia. And then I went and visited all disc jockeys up and down the East Coast and so forth, because that's where the record label was. And then when the record broke, of course, well, then they started, they put me to work first in clubs, then on big shows, and did the Brooklyn Fox with Alan Freed, and the Dick Clark Saturday Night Show, and the Beach Nut Show, which was a half hour of, actually all the acts were there live. They weren't playing because they didn't have the sound together back then on TV. But so we'd mime our records and our hits, and be myself and Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, Bobby Darin, people like that.
Wow.
The Everly Brothers, so forth. And we'd have an audience of 62 million because there was only 3 channels.
Wow.
And everybody watched that show. The bulk of the TV watchers, and so they had the highest ratings. But nowadays, to get 62 million to watch something, would have to be either, I guess, the Academy Awards or the Super Bowl.
Right. Wow. And you named so many amazing people there that you worked with. What was it like? Was it just a job? You went in and you did your job, or were all these people probably very unique to spend day in and day out with?
Oh, it became a profession for me. I prided myself on being a professional, doing it, giving it my best, everything I did, and leaving nothing to chance and so forth, as any good professional does, and knowing what was expected of me and delivering, and I had the best band in the country for a while there, and the highest paid as well. And we toured all over America. We went to England in 1960, and that was, they took to me like Elvis. It was an amazing experience, and went to Germany, the Netherlands, South Africa, Australia. 20,000 people met us at the airport in Australia, so that was both times we went, 59 and 60. So it was pretty exciting. Pretty exciting being a rock and roll star in the 50s and 60s, early 60s.
I would think so. How do you wear the label when people tell you that you're one of the founders, of rock and roll? How do you take that?
Well, let me just say this. I'm a pioneer.
It's got to feel pretty good, right?
My folks, my family came to this country from England in 1630. And that's my father's side, the Eddies. And they came on a ship called the Handmaiden and landed at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. They bought a farm and started farming there. And my mother's side of the family came 8 years later, also from the same county but a different place. They didn't know each other until my mom and dad met, but they lived there for several years. They moved to Connecticut, and then they moved down to Bradford County, Pennsylvania, over the next couple of hundred years at different times. And then they were both in Bradford County there, in Towanda and Waverly, and my dad and mom met at a dance and fell in love, and that's how the families got together. But so they were pioneers. The Eddies have been pioneers for centuries.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's interesting, too, with the connection to rock and roll, because obviously you're an example of having that huge influence of country music. You mentioned Hank Williams, of course, Gene Autry. So, I mean, without country music, there is no rock and roll.
That's right. And I just found out a few years back that, because it's the same thing that Jimmy and I called it, we called it hopped up country that we were doing. And because we were doing up-tempo country songs and just kind of rocking it a little like rockabilly, although it hadn't been named rock. There was no rock and roll or rockabilly yet. So we called it hopped up country. And I just found out recently that Elvis called it that too. He said, I'll just do a little hopped up country. And the Sun Record stuff.
Sure.
And so... yes, if there had been no country, and then, of course, Elvis mixed a little black gospel and white gospel, southern gospel in it, and he defined the whole thing. Bill Haley had that big, huge Rock Around the Clock from the movie the year in 1955, and then Elvis got his Sun stuff done in 55, but that was just under the radar kind of that year. But then Steve Schultz signed him to RCA Victor in 1956 and released Heartbreak Hotel, and that broke everything wide open. And I saw Elvis in person. He came to Phoenix in August of 56, and he'd had Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog and a few things like that, Teddy Bear. And so it was at the grandstand at Phoenix, hot as can be, probably 110 or 15 in the sun, but he came around the track there in the car and then got out and ran up on stage where Scotty and Bill and J.D. were already playing, and he just jumped into it, It was exciting. The girls were going crazy, climbing the fence they had in front of the grandstand to protect it from any race cars going into the audience on race day.
Yeah.
But, it was very exciting. Girls are screaming, he's singing, and I thought, man, I see what he's doing. I could do that. But I didn't know how I'd get an opportunity, and I didn't for another year, but until he said, let's make an instrumental. I just kept playing in my country group up until then. We did a lot of those songs. We did Elvis, and the Everlys came along in 57, Buddy Holly, and so we did them all in our dances, you know.
Corning native and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member Duane Eddy is our guest this morning on Frankly Speaking on News Talk 1230 and 1450 on the AM, 106.9 on the FM dial. So obviously you're known for that twangy sound. How did you come up with that?
Well, that's where Hank Williams and the country artists come in.
Okay.
I just learned by listening to them that you need to get your own sound and your own style and do it with authority.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because that's what they did. They just let it all hang out and just, you know, and Elvis too. He did it with authority. And I used the template more from Elvis and rock and roll, but I was still, in the back of my mind was Hank Williams and Buck Owens and those people that just had that authority and the emotion. Mm-hmm. And I tried to incorporate that all into, and I realized from what little recording I had done up to that point, working on other people's sessions a few times, that the bass strings recorded better than the high strings. So I thought, well, I'll go down that neighborhood, and I knew that riffs were very seldom, you know, the same thing over and over, very seldom successful. They were sometimes, but you needed a melody, so I started, the first thing, it was kind of half and half. Moving and grooving was up high and down low. But then when we went back in March and cut Rebel Rouser, I decided to keep it all down low and have a melody.
Yeah.
Which I did.
Well, reading up on just your amazing career, and I know that at some point in an interview you had said that, and I think this shows your appreciation for country music, that you said how important it was that you played the Grand Ole Opry with Chet Atkins. That must have been just amazing.
Oh, that wasn't amazing. That was in August 17th, 1996. I remember it so well. And the producer said, we want to do a guitar night. We're going to have Chet. We'd like to have you and Doyle Dykes. And he said, you know, it's only a half hour long, so that's about it.
Yeah.
And you can do a couple songs. And then, so we did that. And I knew Chet by then. I met him in 1959. But I didn't really get to know him until later. But anyway, we did our song. Chet did his, and Doyle did something. And he's a finger picker like Chet, but he does it on acoustic more than electric. And then the producer came and said, well, they're back in the dressing room discussing, they want you to do something all together. And he said, so you better get back there. So I ran back there, and Chet says, we're going to do I Saw the Light in the key of A. I thought, okay. That's it. We're not going to run through it or anything or talk about who comes first. And we didn't. But it was time to go on stage, and we went out and plugged in. Chet says, well, let Duane take the first verse. Because everybody knows the chorus of I Saw the Light, but unless you know Hank Williams,
yeah, right.
I don't know the song, you don't know the first. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't trying to mess me up. He just thought, I guess maybe it was half a test or something. I don't know. But anyway, he went boom, 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 ching, boom, ching, boom, ching. So I started playing the melody on I Saw the Light, and when he came in on the chorus, I just nearly came out of my boots because it was so exciting. It just zapped me right back to 14 years old listening to him on the radio. And when he used to play with Grandpa Jones and Bill Carlisle and those people on the Grand Ole Opry, and that thumb-picking style of his, that galloping guitar, he just and he played "I Saw the Light," and it was just, I was in heaven, hog heaven. But here I was on the Grand Ole Opry playing with Chet Atkins, a Hank Williams song. Just didn't get any better than that.
No. Duane Eddy is our guest this morning. Corning native, of course, and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member. I keep mentioning the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. What was that like for you, being in the class? You know, Elton John, John Lennon, Bob Marley, Grateful Dead. It had to be quite an honor to be in the Hall of Fame.
It was. It was really. They threatened to put me. I was nominated several times before they finally just called up and said, "Come on up, we're putting you in."
Yeah.
And of course, Bob Marley or John Lennon, neither one were there. And John Fogerty was supposed to induct me because he's a big fan. Okay. But a couple of days, and who was it? A singer, Jeff Beck, inducted. I can't remember his name right now. It's a huge artist. But he was going in, and Jeff Beck played with him, so he inducted him. And Fogerty was supposed to induct me, but he and Rod Stewart, that's who it was.
Okay.
And Rod was going in, but he and Rod both lived out on Mulholland Drive in California, and 2 days before the event in New York, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they had a huge earthquake, and both their houses slid down the hill. And so they didn't, nobody got hurt. John said, I woke up and I realized it's an earthquake. What do I do? Oh, the kids. He had the kids. And he said, I got them and my wife and ran out and watched the house just kind of slide down several feet down the hill. And Rod, the same thing, I guess, further down the mountain. And his house, suffered damage. So they both checked into the Bel Air Hotel and stayed there, and they didn't fly back to New York. They stayed with their family because it was so traumatic and for the families.
Sure.
And so Mick Jones, a foreigner, inducted me.
Okay.
And that was nice. I played my song, made my little speech, and I looked down, and there's John F. Kennedy Jr. sitting there, and looking amazingly handsome. And Paul McCartney and Linda were there, and Chuck Berry was sitting right.
Oh, wow.
And Dion of the Belmonts, and I sat next to Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, and I just saw everybody I knew practically, for my old buddies and people from my era on up to the 90s, and it was pretty exciting.
When you mentioned the people that were there from the beginning, how has the music business changed since you first got in?
It's gone through many, many, many changes. It started out there were 3 or 4 big labels like RCA Victor, Columbia, and Decca, and which became Universal. And anyway, they were the big labels, but there were tons like Dot Records and my company, Jamie Records, Imperial that Fats Domino was on, and just a bunch of independent labels. And it was like the Wild West in those days. The independents just, they sent their records to the radio stations all over the country, and the DJs in those days used to pick the records. They'd go through the ones that came in, sometimes 100 or 150, 200 a week. And they'd have to listen to all of them and decide which ones they wanted to play. And then they all had their charts all over the country. They weren't all united then. And they're all independent. The radio stations were independent as well. So they'd try something on their audience and what they thought was good or would work. And then the audience would phone in and say, oh, I like that, play that again. So it might make it onto their little charts and say in Kansas City, and then the next town over or something, or another city down, Wichita, might see their chart and say, well, I'm not been playing that record. I'll see how my audience likes it. Yeah. And so they'd have all these charts and billboards from these independent radio stations, and a lot of them were different, a lot of them were pretty much the same because it kind of sorted itself out. And the audience kind of picked it through what the DJs exposed to them, and program directors and everything.
Right.
And then Dick Clark would see that in Philadelphia, and he had a nationwide TV show in the afternoon where he just played records and the kids danced to it for an hour or two before the Mickey Mouse Club came on.
Yeah.
And so he'd watch these charts till he'd see a record on 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 of them, and then he'd start playing it, you know. And once he started playing it, everybody in the country heard it and it'd take off like a scalded dog, as they say, and just go right up the charts. Then that went on that way for several years, and then big companies started buying up the small labels. Got to be from a $3 billion business that went to a, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, $50 billion business a year, and in the late 60s. And when the baby boomers hit, they really started selling tons of records, everybody, and the Beatles. And, of course, Elvis was still the king. He sold over around, well, I walked in there a few months after he died, and the lady I knew at RCA Victor, who was in charge of releasing his product, said, well, we just shipped a new album of Elvis's this morning, and that put us over the billion mark.
Wow.
With that, and that's billion with a B, and we've sold a billion Elvis records, and he's probably closer to over 2 billion by now, because that was 35, 40 years ago. It was in the late 70s. And anyway, so that all changed. Then the record companies got, as some people will do with huge success, they got very greedy, and they tried to cut the artist out of the deal and just make, I don't know, manufactured records.
Yeah.
And that didn't really work. That came along in the 80s and 90s. And there were different trends along the way. The 70s had disco, and they had heavy metal in the late 60s, and that faded, and disco came along, and that faded, and I had a hit in the 80s with a group in England called the Art of Noise. They were techno pop, and they called it, and because they did it all on computers mostly, and weird noises and everything. That's why they called them the Art of Noise. And we redid one of my original hits called Peter Gunn, the Henry Mancini song, and I had a hit all over the world with that in 1959 and 60, and so we redid that in 1985 or 6, and it won a Grammy for Best Rock Instrumental of that year, and so it was in the top 10 all over the world, except in America it was in the top 50 because the record company got into trouble with the government by their promotion men were dealing in drugs and stuff like that, payola. So they all got fired or arrested, and there was no promotion men in the middle of the country, so we lost the record except on both coasts. And there it was number 1 everywhere, and it got in the top 50 in Billboard. So, but that's the record business.
Duane Eddy is our guest this morning on Frankly Speaking here on News Talk 1230 and 1450 on the AM dial, 106.9 on the FM dial. I know currently you're in Nashville and you've got a lot of great projects going on. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, I have. I've been, there's been a guy came to town. He has started this group called the Black Keys.
Of course.
About 8 years ago or so, and had huge hits and sold out stadiums, just he and his buddy Pat Kern. And anyway, he's Dan Auerbach is his name, and he's the singer of the group and the guitar player. And he came to Nashville, and he met some people, and he got talking to people. He decided to stay here, and he bought a studio And through this guy we all know here in town, he's a character and well-connected and everything. He's a studio owner and engineer. He was Johnny Cash's engineer for years. And also Jack Clemens' engineer, Cowboy. Jack Cowboy Clemens, they called him. He produced early Jerry Lee Lewis records for Sun. He produced Charlie Pride, country artist. He produced Johnny Cash, and he wrote Ballad of a Teenage Queen. Jack Clemens did.
Wow.
And anyway, he and Ferguson, Dave Ferguson, the engineer, were best buds, and they and Dave met Dan and started introducing him to people, and so Dan started writing with some of these people, and then he wanted to use some live musicians, so Fergie got the Memphis guys, Bobby Wood and Gene Crispin, and he got them in the studio and with Dan, and he started writing with Pat McLaughlin, who works with John Prine. He wrote with John Prine, and he put this album together. He called me up. He says, "You want to come play on it?" I said, "Sure." So I went down there, and I never left for about 3 months. No, I'd just go down almost every day, and if I didn't play a lead part, I'd play a background thing, a ticky-tick thing on my 6-string bass. And so I'm playing on the album, but he finally finished it up and released it, and it's already the one song, "Shine on Me," is #1 in the alt-rock chart in Billboard. And I played on King of a One-Horse Town and Cherry Bomb, and I think I played on a solo on a couple others that I have little solos on, and but we did a lot more stuff than that. We just that I did play a lot more on, and but he just picked 10 that he wanted for this album, and they kind of fit it all together, and we did some oddball stuff too, but that didn't fit with the album. But so the other night we did a show in downtown Nashville at the Station Inn, which is an old bluegrass haunt. But Dan came there many, many years ago. His dad brought him to see a bluegrass group, Del McCoury and the McCoury's family, and they're on this new album now, I think. I know they did the show with us the other night and sang a couple songs. They're either on this or the last one. And they're not on this one. But anyway, they were there at the show the other night, and I was there, and we played the whole album and a couple extra things.
That's cool.
And it was very exciting, very good. The sound was great, and the show was good, and the place was packed. You couldn't even move hardly. So that's what I've been doing.
Duane Eddy is our guest this morning. I don't want to keep you all day, but I have to ask you kind of a strange question on this, because I've seen a trend. You talked about Gene Autry. You obviously had the song High Noon and the Ballad of Paladin, and I'm a big Western fan. Is that what led to this? Have you always been a big Western movie and Western TV fan?
Oh, yeah. Always. I used to go to all those movies, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, The Sons of Pioneers, and Tim Holt, and Wild Bill Elliott, and Whip Lash LaRue, Whip Wilson. Remember all those?
Oh, yeah. I know
Carson.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know where those names come in my brain, but they just popped in there when you mentioned Westerns. And I actually acted in a movie, couple of movies. One of them was called Thunder Drums, and I met Richard Boone, who did the Have Gun Will Travel, Paladin. That's
what I was going to get to. I wanted to ask what it was like to work with Richard Boone on an episode of Have Gun Will Travel. I just recently got into the program, and I'm hooked on it. I think the program's wonderful.
It is. It was, he was amazing. He was larger than life, and he incredibly intelligent and talented, and he directed a lot of those as well as acted in them, and came up with the concept and a whole 9 yards. And so I did Thunder of Drums with him, which was a full-blown movie, and about the cavalry. And so we became, that was in 1961, we became friends and stayed friends until he died in 1981 and of throat cancer. But in the meantime, 1961 or 2, I did a couple of Have Gun Will Travel shows. And that was weird when the first one I did, I had to yell up at him a line saying, this girl was fighting me, and I'm holding her off, and I say, "What'll I do with her, Mr. Paladin?" And I thought, I'm really actually saying this serious. You know? Now that was a kick. Oh. But he was fun to be around. He was just gregarious and just, always, everybody loved him. He was bigger than life, and he did Big Jake with John Wayne, and John Wayne never did another picture without him.
Yeah.
Because he told me the one scene they did, that big, he'd kidnapped John Wayne's grandson, and they met somewhere to talk about it, and John Wayne says, "You harm a hair on that kid's head, I'm going to kill you. I'll hunt you down and kill you." Yeah. Dick says, "Well, now," he says, "that just scares me to death." And then the director said, "Cut," and John Wayne come over, and he's rubbing. He says, "Man," he says, "I thought we were going to go at it there for a minute." Because they're acting, they're so much into their parts, and Dick is so much into his that it got John Wayne into his, and it just, he was ready to hit him. Which might have been a bad mistake.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's...
Wow. Yeah. I'm glad that you told me all that. I just, I think the program's wonderful, and it's tough to watch him in Have Gun Will Travel and then see him as the bad guy, like in Big Jake, because he's just so good in Have Gun Will Travel.
I know it. I loved him as a hero, but the bad stuff. But he was awful at that. I mean, he was just awful. You just didn't. You couldn't. You hated him.
I know.
But it's funny. I was out there when he did Ombre in Tucson. I visited the set, and he did some of those parts, and he was really nasty and everything, and mean, and then director would say cut, and he'd come over and he'd just he'd be laughing about something, and we'd be or somebody'd tell him a joke or say something funny, and he'd just fall down laughing, and it was just entirely different personality.
Yeah, great.
He could switch it on and off like he didn't always do that, but he could.
Yeah.
It was just fun being around him. I loved hanging out, and he'd come visit me about once or twice a year, and we'd do something nutty like fly to Acapulco or to the Caribbean or something, and with his brother and his brother's wife, and just get a bunch of people together and just party.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just go see something new and different. And it was just great. His brother is a year younger than him, or a year older, I'm sorry, and Bill Boone. Mm-hmm. And so when they got together, it was like two big bears. And I became an honorary brother at one point, and I just loved them dearly.
Duane Eddy is our guest this morning. I've got to mention just before we go that you have such a wonderful fan club, that the Duane Eddy Circle, I've been talking to the secretary, Arthur. He's helped me so much along the way in this process of reaching out to you. They are dedicated. I'm telling you, this newsletter that they send out, I mean, this should be on the magazine stands. I know. He's really gotten good at that, and he does 3 or 4 or 5 of them a year, depending on how much information. But I've been working, doing a lot lately, so every time he gets a bunch of stuff together, he puts out a newsletter. So. And they're celebrating
I'm celebrating my 60th anniversary next year in 2018. They're celebrating their 40th anniversary of doing the convention. They have a convention every year.
Wow.
In England, where they, spend the afternoon watching Duane Eddy videos and listen to the music, and they have a live band playing my songs, and they just have a big old time,
Duane Eddy has been our guest this morning on Frankly Speaking. And, of course, before we go, anytime that you're in the area, don't hesitate to contact us.
Oh, don't worry, I won't. I may get up to see the cousins. I'm going to try to get up and see them this fall if I can.
Oh, great.
I don't know. I'm starting to gear up for next year's anniversary.
Sure.
So they want to do a documentary. They want me to write a book before the end of the year, and I don't know.
Sounds like a great idea. A book's a great idea, but by the end of the year is kind of tough.
No, I know. I'm going to have to just sit here all summer and type away, I guess.
Yeah.
And, they'll have an editor and all that.
Oh,
so
sure.
They'll correct me, but anyway.
Well,
Frank, I appreciate all this. Appreciate you taking so much time.
Oh, I love it. I'm so glad that you could do it. I can't thank you enough. This has really been a highlight for me.
Well, good. I'm glad. It has been for me, too. It's fun. It just, I don't know, you have those ties you never lose with your birthplace, you know?
Right. You're right.
And I remember my first bio when I had my first hit. The guy wrote, "Perhaps Corning, New York is unaware that Duane Eddy was born there in 1938. Then he went on to tell about what I was doing.
Yeah, that's funny.
I thought, well, maybe they're not unaware. But I mentioned it a lot through my whole career.
Yeah.
People always ask you, where were you born? Corning, New York.
Well, good.
The glass company place.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they make all that beautiful glass.
Exactly.
And they say, well, did you ever go to the factory? I said, no, I was too little.
Yeah.
And I haven't been back for any length of time to take time to go through it.
No, they've got a beautiful museum,
isn't it?
Oh, beautiful museum. Yeah, if you do get up this way, try to make it to the museum. They've got a great museum, and you
can take me there if you got time.
I guarantee I will. You say the word, I'll be there.
All right. We'll have dinner. We'll have lunch or something, and go see the museum.
I'd love it. I'd love every second.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks again, and enjoy Duane Eddy Day.
I am.
Okay.
I just did a good interview for my day.
Well, thanks again.
Frank, thank you so much,
buddy.
It was
great talking to you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.